Well, thank you very much, Don, and I like how you say that you don't have to introduce me because everyone already knows. What he's not saying is there'll be quite a wide range of views as to what the answer to that question actually is, and that's okay. I just want to thank Don, the hard-working chamber staff. They tell me they're putting 100 events a year on. You ask, what is a Chamber of Commerce? A big part of it is just a relentless event machine, and I know how hard they work, so thank you to the people who organised this, and thank you to everyone who came along, especially people who've seen me give speeches before and you came anyway. It's really touching, so thanks guys. And I also just want to say something that I say in a lot of places. Thank you for being in business. We have a society which I believe is unduly suspicious of business. In fact, actually tends to demonise and scapegoat business, and unfortunately they do it right across the political spectrum. You doubt that? Try running a supermarket in this country right now. And I want to just pay tribute to the basic idea of human cooperation, bringing together investors just trying to get a return on their savings, entrepreneurs who have a dream they want to turn into reality, workers who have their skills, and customers who are trying to get some product or service that they couldn't make themselves. It is actually one of the most beautiful forms of human cooperation. That's what I think about business, and I think we should celebrate it. I've been saying it for a long time, and I'll keep saying it because I happen to believe it's true. The other thing is about business is that it's kind of surrounded by politics. And if you think about it, we have a budget every year. Every 3 years, people elect a new parliament. About every 6 to 9 years, 9 would be better, guys, the government changes. But the real change is often invisible at the time it happens. Because you see, this politics, it has this 1 year, 3 year, 6 or 9 year, it has a rhythm that could put you to sleep if it wasn't so bloody maddening. We think about the headlines, the hot takes, the handouts, and at least it seems in the moment, not much is happening. It's when you look back from a generation or two ahead that you start to see that we were actually going somewhere. And what's difficult at any given time is looking through the now and seeing backwards from the future. What big trends were we part of? Whether we realised it or not, what were we doing that we wish we'd spent more time on, even if it didn't stand out back then? In other words, how do we make sure that we will look good at this time when our children look at us through the rearview mirror of history? And if this sounds all a bit familiar, it should, because politics, just like business, is an extension of life, trying to work out what matters now and how it will look in the future. Now, I think at this point, New Zealand, certainly in the short to medium term, it's not too difficult to see we're in the middle of a repair job. We've had years of economic mismanagement. Our spending went from 76 billion in 2017 to 138 billion this current financial year, which ends in next month. And for that extra 52 billion, sure there was some inflation and some population growth in there, but for the extra 52 billion, I don't believe that we got results. And so we have to do this repair job. But what I find is the team that's doing rebuilding all the time is never the team that lifts the trophy. I know that you guys are kind of more in a trophy lifting phase with the Chiefs at the moment, but most teams have to rebuild at different times. And I would like to talk today in a way that acknowledges where we're at. We feel that there are very real challenges, and we do need to live in the now. But it's also a time when I think we've got to ask what choices we need to make if we want to look good in our kids' rearview mirrors. And I'm sure a lot of people have answers, but mine's actually cultural. We're only going to build a winning economy for future generations if we put freedom and personal responsibility of the individual at the heart of what we do, and we see effort and innovation as something that we want to reward. If you get those basic values right, if we can get some agreement on those values, then actually you'll find our ability to solve problems individually and collectively. Because remember, you can believe in individual freedom and still voluntarily cooperate. We will find the policy choices to solve our problems relatively easy. Now, if you look at this budget that the government's just put down, it's a pretty tight one. What we've basically done is increased our spending by about 1.3 billion. That, on top of the 138 I mentioned, is about 0.9% of spending increase. Everything else that we've done that's new has come from reducing costs elsewhere to the tune of about 5.2 billion. So we've done 4 times more savings to fund new stuff than we've done actual new money. The other way that you can look at it is that we have decreased our share of the economy because the inflation rate's 2.5%. Population growth in the last year's been about 0.9%, and yet we've not increased government spending by anything like that. That means that the government is actually pulling in the anchors, and that it can only be good for everyone else in the economy, because when the government takes less, we're out there borrowing less, we're putting less pressure on inflation and interest rates. It means that with less tax, with less interest, businesses out there have greater opportunity to grow, to take on more people, to invest, and ultimately to pay more. One of the biggest and most significant changes that I think is worth talking about, and I'm extremely proud of Brooke Van Velden for what she has done in simplifying our pay equity regime. Forget all of the haters and the naysayers as an attack on women. I mean, give us a break. Let's be really clear here. What we have is a pay equity regime which still exists. You just have to prove that the people disadvantaged are actually in a profession that's at least 70% female, that has historically, for 10 years, been overwhelmingly female, and that can demonstrate that there is cause to believe discrimination has led to less pay. That is still there. What it tells you that people think it's terrible that you have to prove those things to take a pay equity claim is that the pay equity claims that were being taken before, well, either they're going to qualify now because they were genuine, or they're not going to qualify under the new criteria, and actually they never were genuinely about sex discrimination in the workplace. And the outcome fiscally of having much better policy is that the government is no longer putting aside $13 billion over 4 years to pay for this crazy erratic scheme that would have made all sorts of unusual awards that would have had a fiscal impact but not actually made the boat go faster for New Zealand. It means that some people almost arbitrarily would have got paid more. You can understand that. In some cases, the workforces being paid more were 40% men, so they weren't even really about women. But nonetheless, it wouldn't have meant that we were spending money to get outcomes for the taxpayer. We would have been spending money because this rather complex regime required us to. We're not going to do that anymore. And I think it goes to the heart of how countries actually prosper. When you see people on the news they say they were quote unquote working on pay equity claims, and it's a tragedy because their work has been now cancelled. Well, I'm sorry, but anyone who genuinely believes that working on a pay equity claim is actual useful work that will make New Zealand a more prosperous society is not going to make New Zealand a more prosperous society. And so we haven't only freed up a huge amount of cash that we're now applying to more teaching assistants in school, to additional medicines, to additional I want to say primary care, and especially emergency primary care, so we actually get outcomes for taxpayers. We have also introduced a regime that's based on genuine sex-based discrimination and a regime which is closer to meritocracy and the values that actually make a country succeed. But nonetheless, I believe that the reductions that we have made across the government's expenditure are about as big as the pay equity reductions. And if you look at some of the things that are there, my speech points out an 18.4 million reduction in RNZ funding. I hesitate to mention this given that they showed up to report on this lunch, but the fact is every sector of the media has been making reductions and cuts and having to do stuff better and smarter to maintain their audience share. RNZ has had a significant uptick in the number of people that work there, from about 280 to 315 in the past 5 years, while the rest of the media sector's been shrinking. And yet, over that period, they've gone from the clear market leader to the 8th most listened to station in New Zealand. Now, I think, unfortunately, we got to start having the same sort of discipline in government that firms and farms, families have had to have in the last 5 years of challenge. We won't be giving KiwiSaver subsidies to people earning over $180,000. I think that's sensible. If somebody came along and said, we've got a policy idea, we are going to start borrowing more money on the global bond markets, give it to New Zealanders who earn 180k plus, and they're then going to invest it in the share market, I think any financially literate person would say that's absolutely nuts. Well, folks, there's now a very real prospect that the opposition actually will come to you at the next election and propose to restart those government subsidies to KiwiSaver, and you can say, I'm financially literate, that's nuts. I also notice that they are not promising to reinstate the previous pay equity regime. Another thing that we're doing is that we are tightening benefit eligibility for 18 and 19-year-olds. If you have parents that are capable of supporting you, it is crazy that the taxpayer is also giving benefits to the children living in the households of wealthy parents. Now, you know, people say, oh, this is so harsh. I can tell you the biggest supporters of this policy are parents who want their kid off the couch and can't work out why the government is taxing them to pay their kid to undermine them in their own household by subsidising the kid to stay on their damn couch. These are the kinds of changes that are being made, as I said at the beginning, to restore personal responsibility, to restore a belief that individuals really can make a difference in their own life. And I believe that right across the suite of changes, we're just trimming the sails to make the good ship Aotearoa go a little bit faster. However, the heart of the budget is really this 20% capital asset deduction. If you look at the diagnosis, New Zealanders work hard. If you take the labour participation rate and the number of hours a year worked by New Zealanders, no one can say we're lazy people. We are actually hard workers. However, it's also true that we work with less capital equipment and our productivity is lower and we get lower wages than other people in other countries. And that is truly sad. That's, by the way, the genuine pay gap that I think we should all be worried about. Pay gap between New Zealanders and Australians is much larger than the pay gap between men and women in New Zealand. We should try and close them both, but it's that first one I believe is the one that we should be most worried about, because that means that New Zealand men and New Zealand women are getting paid far less than they might otherwise be. The third thing that we know as a fact, apart from having hard work, low capital investment and low productivity, is that we also have comparatively high tax on capital once you look at the structure of our pretty all-inclusive company tax regime and our high headline rate of 28%. So I believe that the tax reductions we're making, giving 20% deductibility for capital assets, while it is not going to change the world, for the amount of money that we are no longer going to collect in tax, it's going to have a comparatively large effect on the amounts of growth and investment, and over 20 years about a 1.5% increase in wages from what they'd otherwise be. And some people say, oh, well, what's 1.5% in 20 years? My challenge is, what is the alternative that is going to do more than that, and who is actually executing it? I think it's actually an important thing to do. There's also a lot of emphasis on making sure that we are doing the things that the government absolutely must do. And while ultimately defence is a bit like insurance, it kind of feels like dead money, and when you don't have to use it, you almost feel like you've been ripped off. The reality is that we can no longer afford to buy less insurance than our neighbours in this region. The Australians are spending 2% of their economy on defence. By 2030 they'll be at 2.4. Our objective is to get to 2% by the early 2030s, and that means that New Zealand can fully participate in its ANZAC alliance and have some hope of deterring others who would intrude into our South Pacific region by keeping in with our traditional allies. Hope we never have to use it, but I think it would be foolhardy not to buy the insurance. So that is one of the most significant investments that we're making. I'm also really proud of what we're doing around school attendance. We're increasing, almost doubling the amount of money that we put into school attendance initiatives, because if you want to understand where we're going to be in a generation's time, the most powerful indicator available in Hamilton or any city today is how many kids actually went to school, because that is the number one indicator of how much knowledge is passed from one generation to the next. And I know that an educated population can overcome whatever challenges they may face. An uneducated population can squander great prosperity. And the number one indicator of where the next generation's going to be has got to be, well, were they actually at school for that knowledge transfer to occur? So you're going to see a much smarter, more uniform approach up and down the country, including the stepped attendance response scheme that has a role for parents, for students, for schools, for government departments, including Orangatamriki, the police, housing. And at each stage of that of a kid's attendance journey, we will have interventions, because I believe getting more kids to school is one of the most important things that we can do. I want to just finish though by where I started. There's a repair job. I've given you a very small selection of the initiatives in the budget, which is summarised by that 1.3 increase, real fiscal restraint, lots of recycling under the surface to deploy money towards more useful investments than what we previously had. But if we look at the next 5 years, New Zealand is at one of its inflection points. And I'm fond of saying that we go through this cycle about every 5 decades. You think about 1840, the treaty was a resolution of a number of problems. You think about the 1890s, universal suffrage, the beginning of the Liberal Party, the beginning of income tax, which by the way came in at 5%. Look at it now. This is why you do not start any new taxes. The 1930s, the start of the cradle to the grave welfare state, the beginning of national labour, and some people here may recall the 80s, the opening of the economy, independent foreign policy, and the beginning of multi-party politics. We are another 50 years on nearly, I believe, at another one of those inflection points. And one of the biggest issues, I think, in need of resolution is how we're going to balance the budget as all the demographics run against us. Right now, If nothing goes wrong and we get everything right for the next 4 years, we're going to see a $3 billion deficit in 2029. That's assuming that, in New Zealand there's no floods, there's no earthquakes, there's no recession, there's no global problems, there's no viruses. If we just hold everything together for 4 years, then we'll have a $3 billion deficit. And then things get much worse, because fundamentally 60,000 people hit 65 every year, and typically they've had fewer children than people were having when this whole system was set up. So we just see a long-term government in deficit. And there's basically 3 things that we are going to be able to do as a country, and we will have to make this decision collectively in the next 2 electoral cycles. One is to just tax more. That's one of the options, and it's an option that different parties to different extents are highly promoting of. They believe that if only there was a tax on capital or on wealth or on capital gains or some combination, they could fill in the budget hole and everything would work. A couple of things about that. Number one, if you look at New Zealand's tax as a percentage of income, just not forget about any particular tax, just add it all up and say how much of people's income goes into tax. We are, if not the highest, one of the highest on the Pacific Rim in any given year. Higher than Australia, Singapore, Japan, Chile, Canada, countries we actually compete against. We are highly taxed for a Pacific Rim country. So people say, well, they all have capital gains taxes. They do, and you could argue about the mix of taxes. But if we increase our tax rate, then the kinds of businesses that I visit in Hamilton, and I've just been at one which is seriously asking, should we relocate to the States where many things will be easier? If we put our taxes up, then it's going to be harder for us to compete. But the deeper problem is a moral problem, that what's really being said by a lot of these parties in favour of new taxes is that your problems are really caused by someone else's success. And your solution is to go and take money off them through some mechanism, and then your problems will be solved. And I believe in the long term, it's culture that matters more than money. And the culture and values we need to get our mojo back won't come from that sort of zero-sum thinking. There's another option, which is just to fudge the whole issue and keep on borrowing. And there are people who genuinely believe that the New Zealand government just has the power to borrow a lot more and we don't have to have these hard conversations. All I'd say is good luck with that. What tends to happen is that as it gets harder to repay, people who are buying government bonds demand higher interest rates or higher coupon rates to get them paid back. And as it gets harder to pay those higher coupon rates, you get into a spiral. Lots of Southeast Asian, South American countries have been through this particular experience. It's a default option if we don't have hard choices. It's an option some people will actively promote. But I think it is a path to ruin. The final option is that we have to get a lot smarter and smaller in our government and basically figure out how to spend less. We've got to move from a default from why not spend a bit more, why not have another rule, why not have another appointment, why not have another program, to would we really do this if we had to count every single penny as carefully as people do in business and in households. I think we need to ask ourselves whether our structure at the top of government is truly responsive and dynamic. 28 ministers, 2 under-secretaries, that's the executive of 30, 82 portfolios, some of which don't even have a department, such as the Minister for Auckland. There is no Auckland department, you'll be pleased to know, but we have a minister, it's not clear why. Labor set it up and had Michael Wood there, but he was too busy doing his share trading, so it didn't get anywhere. So I shouldn't laugh at other people's misfortune. Then you've got some departments which have up to 22 different ministers. So they're advertising at the moment for a chief executive for MB. If you want that job, get ready to have 22 bosses. Doesn't sound like dream job, but I'm sure they'll find a capable person. And then there's some ministers that have 7 or 8 different portfolios. As a result of this organisational structure, in a way, everyone and no one is in charge. And I think simplifying that to say one minister, one department, no ministers without departments, no departments with more than one minister, every minister in the 20 actually at the cabinet table, no ministers outside cabinet, half in and half out. If we were to do that, we wouldn't save money by doing that in and of itself, at least not immediately, but having a more focused and responsive leadership of this massive, $140 billion apparatus, I think would go a long way to getting efficiency over time. We've also got to be honest about entitlements. We have a situation where there's nearly 1 million people now getting national super. They're living longer than ever. I mean, when I was a kid, 65-year-olds were ancient. You meet 65-year-olds now and they're in spandex and they're going to yoga. I mean, I don't know about you, in my workplace we've got some people well over 65 who continue to work, and I think that they should be made pin-up people for actually saying, well, look, if Australia, America, Britain, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Spain, I mean, not all of these countries are traditionally known for their fiscal prudence, but all of them are increasing their age of entitlement for pensions. And I just think as demographic realities kick in, we can't kick the can down the road forever. And the same with working age people. 1 in 6 New Zealanders, despite what I've said about the long hours of the people who do work, it's also true that 1 in 6 New Zealanders are on some sort of a benefit while they're working age. I don't think that's sustainable. And finally, we've got to ask, aside from the structure of government and the level of accountability and responsiveness and the entitlements, the cash transfers that we're hosing out, I think we also got to ask ourselves, is it viable for the government to own $600 billion, over half $500 billion worth of assets, have $238 billion of gross debt that we're paying interest on, and so many of the things that we own, we're hopeless at owning, and we also are making bugger all return on. It's not just that we make no return, we're actually hopeless at it. For example, Pāmu, which many people will know as Landcorp, which is the government owning a bunch of farms, is notorious for having higher animal death rates than other privately owned farms. So government in business is not just bad for the books. If you're a cow, it can be fatal. And I know that here in Waikato that you guys are worried about that, so I'm trying to match my audience here. But these are serious matters, so we've got to ask ourselves, is it really an article of faith that the government owns a bunch of farms? And if you think it might be a good idea, let me tell you a surprise. I'm the 50% shareholding minister on your behalf. If you still think it's a good idea, let me know why. So I think we're going to have a real reckoning in New Zealand in the next 5 years. The demographics, the cost of super, the cost of health, the restrictions in the number of children coming along who are going to be taxpayers, our old sums don't balance. And when your sums don't balance, pretty simple. They put your head in the sand, keep borrowing, see what happens. I think there's a saying on the internet, faff around, find out. Or there's an option of just really going full Lord of the Flies and taking Piggy's lunch. We can do that with more taxes, but I don't think it will end well for a pioneering culture of people who came to these islands for a better life. The good ones will decide if that's the case, I'm out. Or we can start asking ourselves, why do we have this government? What things do we absolutely need it to do? And what are the most effective ways for that to happen? With that scenario, I think we have quite a bright future. So with that, I'm really looking forward to your questions. I understand they've been done on Slido, so you can ask me all the really mean ones without having to put your face by it. And that I welcome. I think we need more open discussion and disagreement in this country. So thank you very much.